growing scandal involving Prince Harry and his last remaining genuine charity project, the Invictus Games. But is it really a charity project at all?
It was supposed to be a Christmas video. That's all anyone was meant to see. A fireplace. 2 children in matching pajamas. A married couple smiling into the camera, thanking the world for another year of good work, but somewhere behind that fireplace, 3 people had already been told their jobs were gone. They found out 8 days before the video went live. Not from a press release. Not from an announcement. According to reporting at the time, they were told in private, one by one, while the public-facing machine kept turning, kept smiling, kept building toward a moment engineered for warmth. I want you to sit with that for a second. Because this is where the story actually begins, not with scandal, not with accusation, but with a gap. A gap between what a family shows the world and what is happening 2 rooms over while the cameras are pointed the other way. This is the story of Archewell. You know the names already. Prince Harry. Meghan Markle. The charity that carried their son's name into the world, built to outlast the palace they walked away from. For years it was framed as proof that stepping back from royal duty didn't mean stepping back from purpose. Proof that they could build something that mattered entirely on their own terms. That was the story they told. Here is the story the paperwork tells. Donations down by more than half in a single year. A deficit where there used to be a surplus. A board with exactly 2 names on it, the same 2 names on the wedding invitation.
I don't think that we can ever have peace with my family unless the truth is out there.
A charity watchdog that has asked, in writing, 3 separate times, for one basic document and been ignored every single time. And now, weeks after that Christmas video aired, a rebrand. A new name. A new structure. A new explanation for why the old one no longer worked. Something changed inside that organization. And whatever it was, they didn't want you watching while it happened. So let's watch anyway. Hi, everyone. Before we go further, I want to ask you something simple, something personal, and I want you to answer it in the comments before you keep watching. Not an essay. Just one sentence. If you found out today that a charity you donated to had quietly let go of half its staff right before releasing a cheerful holiday video, would that change how you felt about the people behind it? Yes or no? Type it below. I'll be reading. Now, back to what actually happened. On December 19, 2025, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex announced that their charitable foundation, the one carrying their eldest son Arch's name since its founding in 2020, would be changing its identity. Archewell Foundation was becoming Archewell Philanthropies. The framing was careful. A spokesperson described it as a shift toward what's called a fiscal sponsor model. A structural change meant to streamline operations, reduce overhead, and let the organization function under the administrative umbrella of a larger sponsoring entity rather than running everything independently.
They claim, just like a deadbeat dad, the check is in the mail.
Oh, I'm sure it is.
Yes.
On paper, that sounds almost boring. Administrative. The kind of internal restructuring that happens at non-profits all the time and rarely makes headlines. But here's the detail that turned a quiet paperwork adjustment into a story people couldn't stop talking about. Just over a week before that announcement, 3 staff members were told they were losing their jobs. One of them was Kristen Slevin, the foundation's Director of Programs and Operations, a woman whose salary, according to the organization's own federal tax filing, was $146,000 a year. Not a junior assistant. Not an intern. A director. Someone who had been inside the operational core of the charity, someone who understood exactly how the organization worked from the inside. She was one of 3 let go that week. And when reporters asked about it, the response from a spokesperson for the couple was direct, and it directly contradicted what sources were telling the press. Currently, the same full team remains in place, the statement read. Read that again. 3 people were, by multiple independent reports, informed they were losing their positions. and the public statement said nothing had changed.
Having seen my family and the institution's part in constantly feeding the British press with lies, mistruths, disinformation.
That's not a technicality. That's not a misunderstanding about timing. That is two completely different versions of the same week, one for the employees living it and one for everyone else. Which version do you believe? I'm not going to tell you yet. I want you to sit in that uncertainty for a minute, because that discomfort, that's the whole story. That's what happens when an organization built entirely around image control has to manage a moment it didn't choose to reveal. Let's back up. Because to understand why this moment mattered, you need to understand what this charity was supposed to represent in the first place. Archewell Foundation was created in 2020, in the same window of time Harry and Meghan formally stepped back from royal duties and relocated their lives to the United States. The name came from their eldest son. The mission, according to its own filings, was to uplift and unite communities, local and global, online and offline, one act of compassion at a time. Grand language. The kind of language every new foundation uses when it's trying to signal purpose before it has a track record. For a while, it worked. The foundation backed programs supporting parents, mental health advocacy, girls' education, resettlement support for Afghan refugee families. It helped fund a playground in Uvalde, Texas, built in memory of the 19 children killed in the 2022 shooting at Robb Elementary School. These were real programs, tied to real causes, and for a period, the foundation's public identity rested comfortably on them. But underneath the programs, something structural never changed. And it's the kind of thing most donors never think to ask about. Who is actually in charge here?
So do we have an idea as to when the check is going to be delivered?
Apparently very, very soon. So this should be rectified. Apparently they're saying it should be rectified within 7 days.
According to Archewell's own tax filings, the answer has been the same since the beginning. 2 names. Harry, Duke of Sussex. Meghan, Duchess of Sussex. That's the entire governing board. Non-profit governance experts will tell you, and I mean this as simply as I can put it, that's not how a healthy charity is supposed to work. The widely accepted standard in the sector is a minimum of 5 independent voting board members, the majority of whom have no personal or financial stake in the founder's success. The reasoning is straightforward. A board exists to check the people running the organization day to day, to catch mistakes, question decisions, and make sure the charity serves its stated mission rather than the interests of whoever founded it. When the people being checked and the people doing the checking are the same 2 people, married to each other, there is no check at all. Laurie Styron, the CEO of the non-profit watchdog group CharityWatch, has said exactly this, publicly, more than once. A board that small, she's explained, isn't equipped to provide meaningful oversight, manage conflicts of interest, or guarantee that major decisions are being reviewed from more than one perspective. It's not an accusation of wrongdoing. It's a structural warning, the kind risk analysts flag long before anything goes wrong, precisely because it's the condition under which things tend to go wrong later. And in Archewell's case, that warning came years before the deficit, years before the layoffs, years before the rebrand. Nobody was listening yet. They are now. Because here's where the story turns from a governance footnote into something people can actually feel in their gut. The money stopped adding up. In 2023, Archewell reported roughly $5.3 million in donations. By 2024, that number had fallen to about $2.1 million. That's not a small dip. That's a collapse of more than half the organization's incoming revenue in a single year. And the spending didn't fall to match it. By the most recent reporting period, the foundation's own financial filings showed revenue of roughly $2.7 million against expenditures of about $5.2 million, a deficit of approximately $2.6 million. The year before, they'd reported a surplus of about $2.4 million. Sit with that swing for a moment. A multi-million-dollar surplus becoming a multi-million-dollar deficit in the span of one reporting cycle. That's not a rounding error. That's not bad luck. That's an organization spending significantly beyond what it's bringing in, at exactly the moment its donor base was already shrinking. When reporters asked about it, a representative for the couple offered a response that deserves to be read slowly. The deficit, the spokesperson said, was an intentional, mission-aligned decision demonstrating Archewell's commitment to putting dollars to work in the world and maximizing social return on past fundraising efforts. Translation, in plain language, we spent more than we had, on purpose, because we believed in the cause. Maybe that's true. Charities do sometimes draw down reserves deliberately to fund a specific push. But you cannot evaluate whether that explanation holds up. Whether this was strategy or whether this was an organization losing control of its own finances without seeing the full picture. Without an audit. Without transparency.
She never said to me that she was angry. I think she was sad that it had got to that point.
And that's exactly the document nobody outside the organization has ever been allowed to see. Archewell's tax filings state, in writing, that the organization's financial statements are independently audited. That's a specific, checkable claim. An independent audit means an outside accounting firm has gone through the books, tested the numbers, and issued a formal opinion on whether the finances are accurate. CharityWatch asked to see that audit. In writing. On January 22, 2024. They were ignored. They asked again. In writing. On December 6, 2024. They were ignored again. They asked a third time. By mail, on January 6, 2026. As of January 21, 2026, 2 weeks later, they had received no response. 3 separate written requests, over the span of 2 years, for a document the organization itself claims exists. Not one reply. I want you to ask yourself something, honestly. If your bank statement said this account has been independently audited, and you asked to see that audit 3 times over 2 years and were ignored every single time, what would you assume was in it? You don't need me to answer that for you. You already know how that feels. Now hold that feeling, because it's about to collide with something that already happened once before, a moment in 2024 when this exact charity was publicly declared delinquent, unable to legally raise a single dollar, over what its own team called a simple mistake. That story, the notice that came from the California Attorney General's office, the missing $200 fee, the governor of California himself stepping in to call it overhyped, that's where we're going next. Because if you think this is the first time Archewell has had to explain itself to the public under pressure, it isn't. It's the second time in 2 years. And the way they handled it the first time tells you almost everything about how they're handling it now. I'll continue in the same grounded, factual style, real names, real numbers, real quotes only. I won't manufacture a killer or crime elements that don't exist here, since this is a governance and money story, not a crime story. But I'll keep the tension, rhythm, and pacing you asked for. Every collapse has a paper trail. You just have to know where to look. Most people never read a tax filing in their life. And that's exactly why organizations that don't want to be understood love filing exactly what the law requires, and nothing more. But numbers don't lie the way statements do. Numbers just sit there, waiting. So let's read them. In 2023, Archewell Foundation reported approximately $5.3 million in donations. A healthy number for a charity of its size and profile. The kind of number that lets an organization plan ahead, hire staff, fund new programs, expand its reach. 1 year later, that number was $2.1 million. Read it again if you need to. I did. Less than half. In 12 months. Now, charities go through fluctuations. Donor fatigue is real. Economic pressure is real. A high-profile founder's popularity can rise and fall, and donations often move with it. None of that, on its own, is suspicious. Non-profits are not required to grow every single year. But what happened next is the part that should make you sit up. Spending didn't fall with it. By the close of the most recent reporting period available, Archewell's own financial filings showed revenue of roughly $2.7 million and expenditures of approximately $5.2 million. Do that math with me. That's a deficit of about $2.6 million. In 1 year. At an organization whose income had just been cut in half. And the year before that? A surplus of roughly $2.4 million. A $4 million swing. From comfortably in the black to deeply in the red. In back-to-back reporting cycles. I want you to think about what that actually means inside a real organization. Not a headline. A real building, with real people, real payroll, real bills. A swing that size doesn't happen by accident. Someone approved that spending. Someone watched the number climb and kept signing checks. The question is why? When journalists put that question to a spokesperson for the couple, the answer they got back was smooth. Practiced. The kind of sentence that sounds like an explanation until you actually try to explain what it explained. The deficit, the spokesperson said, was an intentional, mission-aligned decision demonstrating Archewell's commitment to putting dollars to work in the world and maximizing social return on past fundraising efforts. Say that sentence slowly. It tells you nothing. And it tells you everything. Because here's what it doesn't say. It doesn't say which programs absorb that spending. It doesn't name a single grant, a single new hire, a single expansion that accounts for millions of extra dollars going out the door. It doesn't explain why an organization bringing in less money would choose, deliberately, to spend dramatically more. It's the financial equivalent of trust us. And normally, that's exactly what an audit is for. An independent audit isn't a press release. It isn't a summary written by the charity about itself. It's an outside accounting firm, with no loyalty to the organization, going line by line through the books, testing transactions, verifying balances, checking whether the money that came in matches the money that's claimed to have gone out. At the end, that firm puts its own name and its own professional reputation behind an opinion. Accurate. Or not. Archewell's own tax filing states, as a matter of record, that its financial statements are independently audited. That's not a vague claim. That's a specific, checkable one. So CharityWatch checked. They wrote to the Foundation on January 22, 2024, and asked to see the audit. Nothing. They wrote again on December 6, 2024. Nothing. They wrote a third time, by mail, on January 6, 2026. As of 3 weeks later, nothing. 3 requests. 2 years. 0 responses. I keep coming back to this detail because I think it's the single most revealing fact in this entire story. Not the deficit. Not the layoffs. Not the rebrand. The silence. An organization can explain a bad year. Every charity has one eventually. What's much harder to explain is why, when a nationally recognized watchdog group asks, politely, formally, repeatedly, in writing, for a document you claim already exists, you simply do not answer. CharityWatch's CEO, Laurie Styron, has said publicly that this pattern of non-response is precisely what makes her organization unable to issue any rating for Archewell at all. Not a bad rating. Not a warning label. No rating whatsoever, because a rating requires information, and the information isn't coming. Think about what that means for anyone who's ever donated. You gave money to an organization that tells the government its books are independently verified. And the one group whose entire job is to verify that claim has been stonewalled for 2 straight years. That's not proof of wrongdoing. But it is the exact condition under which wrongdoing becomes possible. And impossible to rule out. Here's where it gets more uncomfortable. In December 2025, in the same window as the layoffs and the rebrand, Archewell also began posting something called an impact report on its website. A glossy internal document describing its programs and outcomes for the year. On the surface, that sounds like transparency. A report. Numbers. Progress. But an impact report is not an audit. It isn't written by an outside party. It isn't tested against the underlying transactions. It's written by the charity, about the charity, chosen and shaped by the charity to present itself in the best possible light. CharityWatch put it plainly. Because no universal standard exists for measuring impact across different charities, an organization is free to set its own goalposts and then declare, in its own document, that it met them. It's the difference between a student grading their own exam and handing the paper to a teacher. One of those processes can be trusted by strangers. The other cannot. And Archewell, faced with 2 years of unanswered requests for the real document, chose to publish the version they wrote about themselves. So let me ask you something, and I want you to actually answer honestly, in your own head, before you keep watching. If a company told you your account was independently verified, and then refused, 3 times, to show you that verification, would you keep trusting them with your money? Hold that answer. Because we're about to go back 1 year earlier, to the very first time this exact organization was caught in almost identical trouble, and the way they handled it then tells you everything about how they handled it now. Nothing about this story happened for the first time in December 2025. It happened first in May 2024. And if you want to understand why nobody inside Archewell seemed surprised by the backlash last winter, you need to understand what they'd already survived 18 months earlier. Here's what happened. In May 2024, California's Attorney General, Rob Bonta, issued something called a Notice of Delinquency to Archewell Foundation. In plain terms, the state had determined the charity had not paid its required annual registration fee and had not filed its annual report on time. The consequence was immediate, and it was serious. Under California law, a delinquent charity cannot legally raise money in the state. Not a dollar. The fundraising apparatus simply stops. State records showed the foundation's last renewal had been back in May 2023. More than a year had passed with the paperwork sitting unresolved. Now, on its own, this could be nothing. Administrative fees get lost. Mail gets misplaced. It happens to small non-profits every year, and most of the time nobody outside the organization ever hears about it. But this wasn't a small non-profit. This was one of the most publicly visible charitable names in the world, founded by 2 of the most photographed people on the planet. And when the story broke, it didn't stay quiet for long. A source close to the organization told reporters that the initial payment check had been lost in the mail and that a new one had already been resubmitted. The issue, they said, would be resolved within days. And it was. The very next day, California's Attorney General's office confirmed Archewell was no longer listed as delinquent. A spokesperson for the charity was unequivocal in the statement that followed. We have diligently investigated the situation and can confirm that the Archewell Foundation remains fully compliant and in good standing, the statement read. Due payments were made promptly and in accordance with the IRS's processes and procedures. Furthermore, all necessary paperwork had been filed by the Foundation without error or wrongdoing. No error. No wrongdoing. Case closed, according to them. But here's the detail that made this story bigger than a missing filing fee. California's own governor stepped into the conversation. Gavin Newsom, appearing at an unrelated public event focused on behavioral health, was asked directly about the coverage. His response was pointed. He told reporters the foundation situation was typical and that the delinquency notice reflected nothing more than a technical paperwork issue that was wildly overhyped. Think about the strangeness of that moment for a second. A sitting governor, at an event about an entirely different subject, felt compelled to publicly defend a private couple's charity against what he considered excessive media attention. That's not a small thing. That tells you how much oxygen this story had already consumed by the time it reached his podium. And in the middle of all of it, almost as an aside, almost lost in the noise of the delinquency headline, CharityWatch made a quieter, more lasting point. One that didn't resolve in a day, the way the fee did. Laurie Styron told reporters that, based on Archewell's 2022 tax filing, the foundation's governing body consisted of exactly 2 people. Harry, Meghan. That's the entire board. Then, in 2024. Still, in 2026. She explained what every non-profit governance expert will tell you, if you ask them plainly. The accepted minimum standard across the sector is 5 independent voting board members. People with no personal stake in the founder's success, whose job is specifically to ask hard questions the founders might not want to answer. A 2-person board, made up of a married couple, cannot do that. Structurally, it is not designed to. There is no one in the room to say no. CharityWatch was careful in how it framed this. Not an accusation. A structural concern, the kind of warning sign risk analysts flag long before anything visibly breaks. At the time, most people moved on. The fee got paid. The governor called it overhyped. The story faded within a week. But 18 months later, the same organization posted a $2.6 million deficit, cut 60% of its staff, and rebranded under a new name, while that same 2-person board remained precisely unchanged. The warning nobody listened to in 2024 became the headline nobody could avoid in 2025. And here's the piece that should genuinely unsettle you. The pattern of response was identical both times. In 2024, a private statement insisting nothing was wrong, delivered swiftly, confidently, in language built to close the story down as fast as possible. In 2025, the private statement insisting the team remained fully intact, delivered swiftly, confidently, in language built to close the story down as fast as possible, while multiple independent sources said the opposite was already happening. Same institution. Same instinct. Same playbook. I want to be precise about something here, because precision matters more than outrage. Neither of these moments, on its own, proves fraud. A missing filing fee is not a crime. A public relations strategy built around swift denial is not, by itself, evidence of wrongdoing. But patterns matter. And when an organization's first instinct, every single time scrutiny arrives, is to minimize, deny, or quietly correct the record after the fact, rather than to open the books and let outsiders see for themselves, that pattern becomes the story. Because the one thing that would resolve all of this in a single afternoon still hasn't happened. The audit. The document they claim exists. The document CharityWatch has now asked for 3 times, across 2 full years, without a single reply. Somewhere in a filing cabinet, or a server, or a locked drawer, that document either exists exactly as described, or it doesn't. And until someone outside that 2-person board is allowed to see it, nobody watching this story, myself included, can tell you which. What we can tell you is what happened next. Because while the public was still processing the rebrand, the deficit, and the layoffs, the person who had been with this couple longer than almost anyone else on their team was already walking out the door. And his exit tells you something the financial filings never could. Every organization has one person who remembers everything. The one who was there before the cameras, before the headlines, before any of it needed managing. The one whose presence tells you, just by existing, that something has held together. For Harry and Meghan, that person was James Holt. And at the end of 2025, he left. To understand why that matters, you have to go back to where he started. May 2018. Windsor. A wedding watched by an estimated 2 billion people around the world. Holt was there that day, already working inside their circle, already absorbing the kind of pressure most people never experience in a lifetime, let alone survive with a clear head. He wasn't new to high-stakes environments. Before joining the couple, Holt had served as head of communications for Nick Clegg, then the United Kingdom's Deputy Prime Minister, a job that meant managing political fallout in real time, in front of a hostile press, with no room for mistakes. That experience mattered. Because what came next, for Harry and Meghan, was arguably harder than politics. Holt moved into communications work for the Archewell Foundation, the shared charitable organization that once encompassed William, Kate, Harry, and Meghan together, before the family split in 2. He watched, from the inside, as that shared institution narrowed down to serve only the Prince and Princess of Wales. And when Harry and Meghan stepped back from royal duties in 2020, Holt didn't stay behind. He followed them to America. First as a press officer, later as co-executive director of Archewell itself. In March 2021, he guided them through the Oprah Winfrey interview, the single most consequential piece of media the couple has ever done, the conversation that reshaped global opinion of the monarchy overnight. That's not a small credential. That's the kind of moment that defines a communications career, for better or worse. Through everything that followed. The staff turnover, the bullying allegations Meghan has denied, the relentless scrutiny, the shifting public mood, Holt stayed. For years, he was, by every account, the only senior aide left who had lived through the entire arc of their public life. Not someone who joined after the story was already written. Someone who was there while it was still being decided. And at the end of 2025, he walked away. A spokesperson for the couple offered a specific detail meant to soften the departure. Holt, they said, would remain a senior philanthropic advisor, still connected, still involved, just no longer inside the building day to day. Maybe that's exactly what it sounds like. A graceful transition for someone who had earned the right to step back. Or maybe it's something else. A soft landing, worded carefully, for an exit that wasn't entirely voluntary. I can't tell you which one it is. Nobody outside that inner circle can. But I can tell you what makes his departure different from every other name on the layoff list. Holt wasn't a junior admin role. He wasn't one of the 3 staff members let go alongside Kristen Slevin in the December cuts. He was, by every description available, the single most experienced person left in that organization, the one who understood, better than almost anyone alive, how to manage the couple's image under pressure. And he left at the exact moment that pressure was at its highest point in years. Around him, the turnover had already become something close to a pattern. In July 2025, months before Holt's own exit, sources told Page 6 that the couple had let go of several other staff members. One royal source, speaking to entertainment reporter Rob Shutter, didn't hold back. It's the same old story, the source said. They cycle through staff as quickly as normal people cycle through toilet paper. Milk lasts longer than their employees. That's not a flattering comparison. But it's the kind of line that sticks, precisely because so many other sources kept describing the same thing in different words. Another source, describing the wave of departures, put it even more starkly. This isn't strategy, it's survival, they said. They're running out of money, and now they're running out of people. Running out of money. Running out of people. At the exact same moment. That's not a coincidence. That's cause and effect. Because underneath all of this sits one more pressure point that rarely gets mentioned in the same breath as the charity, but should. The couple's reported $100 million deal with Netflix was, by multiple accounts, approaching its expiration around this same period. Whatever new terms come next, renewal, renegotiation, or nothing at all, will shape not just their personal finances, but very possibly the resources available to keep Archewell itself running. A charity losing donors. A staff losing its most experienced people. A media deal reaching its natural end point. All 3 converging in the same 12-month window. That's not one story. That's 3 stories, colliding. And somewhere in the middle of that collision stands a 2-person board, still unchanged, still unaudited by anyone outside the organization, still the only 2 people with full visibility into how bad, or how manageable, this actually is. I keep returning to the same question, because I think it's the only one that actually matters here. If the finances were genuinely fine. If the deficit really was, as they claimed, an intentional and mission-aligned choice. If the staffing changes really were as routine as the spokesperson insisted. Why does every explanation arrive only after the story has already broken? Why is there never a moment where they get ahead of it? Sit with that question. Because it's the one we're going to try to answer, honestly and carefully, as we bring this story to its conclusion. Here is what we actually know, laid out plainly, without spin in either direction. We know that Archewell's donations fell from roughly $5 $3 million to $2.1 million in a single year. We know the organization then posted a deficit of approximately $2.6 million, reversing a surplus of $2.4 million the year before. We know 60% of its staff were let go. We know its most experienced senior aide, James Holt, departed at the tail end of 2025 after guiding the couple through nearly every defining moment of their public life since 2018. We know the organization rebranded from Archewell Foundation to Archewell Philanthropies in the same narrow window all of this was unfolding. And we know that a nationally recognized charity watchdog has requested an independent audit 3 separate times over 2 years and received no response any of the 3 times. That's the record. Not speculation. The record. What we don't know, what nobody outside a 2-person board currently knows, is why. Why the spending outpaced the income so dramatically? Why the audit that's referenced in their own tax filing has never been shown to the one organization whose job is to check it? Why every explanation, every single time, has arrived only after reporters already had the story, rather than before? There are, realistically, only a few possible answers. It's possible this is exactly what the spokesperson described. A mission-driven organization deliberately spending down reserves to maximize impact during a difficult fundraising year, going through an ordinary restructuring that simply looks worse from the outside than it is on the inside. It's also possible this is an organization that expanded its ambitions faster than its donor base could sustain, and is now scrambling, under the guise of a rebrand, to right-size itself before the gap becomes impossible to manage quietly. And it's possible. And this is the version that should concern anyone who ever donated a single dollar, that a charity with no independent oversight, run by exactly 2 people who are married to each other, has simply never had anyone in the room whose job it was to say no. I want to be honest with you about something. This isn't a story with a tidy ending. There's no confession, no single document that resolves every question, no moment where the truth gets handed to us in plain language. That's precisely what makes it uncomfortable, and precisely why it deserves attention instead of a shrug. Because the fiscal sponsor model Archewell has now adopted could, genuinely, be the responsible move. Handing administrative and financial oversight to an established sponsoring organization is a legitimate strategy non-profits use when they've outgrown their own capacity to manage themselves safely. If that's truly what's happening here, the numbers should start stabilizing. The staffing should settle. And, eventually, transparency should follow, because a fiscal sponsor typically brings its own layer of financial accountability along with it. Or the rebrand could be exactly what it looks like from the outside right now, a new name draped over the same unanswered questions, the same unaudited books, the same 2-person board making every decision with nobody watching. CharityWatch still cannot issue a rating for this organization. Not a poor rating. No rating at all, because the information required to produce one has never been provided. That silence is still ongoing as this story is being told to you. So here is where I'll leave you, because I think it's the only honest place to end. An audit either exists, in full, exactly as their own filings claim, or it doesn't. Nobody outside that building can tell you which, not yet. What we can tell you is that 3 formal requests, spanning 2 years, have gone unanswered. And in a story about money, about trust, about a name donors were asked to believe in, that silence has become the loudest fact of all. Whatever comes next, whether that audit finally surfaces, whether the fiscal sponsor model stabilizes the organization, or whether next year brings another deficit, another round of departures, another rebrand under another name, one thing is certain. The paperwork is still being filed. The requests are still going out. And somewhere, someone is still deciding whether to finally answer them. We'll be watching when they do. And in the next video, we're going somewhere we haven't gone yet in this story, inside the exact language of that federal tax filing itself, line by line, including a compensation detail buried in the fine print that no outlet has broken down publicly until now. If you thought the 2-person board was the most uncomfortable number in this story, wait until you see what else is sitting in that document.